Good morning and welcome to our special Remembrance Day coverage here on CHEK News, a chance to remember the sacrifices made by those around the world and the hundreds of thousands of Canadians who fought for our freedom, to honor those who served and those who continue to serve today. We'll take a live shot now of the cenotaph in the Victoria Inner Harbour. It looks a little different this year. No street closures, no parade. Missing are the tens of thousands of people who usually attend. As you know, with COVID-19, the crowds have been told to stay home, and it looks like people have followed. While the ceremony has been scaled back in size, the message and the sentiment of today's ceremony has not and will not change. We are expecting the arrival of Lieutenant Governor Janet Austin shortly. When she arrives, the ceremony will begin, and we will bring that to you live when it happens. Joining us in studio for another Remembrance Day, I'd like to welcome former commander of the Canadian Scottish Regiment, Princess Mary's retired honorary Colonel Richard Talbot. Richard, thank you for coming back for another year.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
For many people and veterans, this is the first time that they've been asked to stay home and not attend a ceremony, and a ceremony that means so much to them. How do you think that is weighing on folks today?
I think it'll be very tough because, this will be the first time I remember not going to a ceremony since I was a kid. And for those who served, particularly seeing their old comrades and remembering their old comrades, that they will still do that at home. But there is something special about being with a group of your veterans together, marching together, and praying and thinking together.
We were wondering how many people would follow orders and stay home, and it looks like many, the majority have. I just spoke to our reporter in Nanaimo, about 50 people there. It looks like a smaller crowd in Victoria. Are you surprised? I mean, you always wonder if veterans will say, you know, this is Remembrance Day, I'm turning up, I don't care, I want to be there. Are you surprised that people followed?
No, this is Vancouver Island, and we do what we're told. Unlike some other people across the country.
I'm curious what's on your mind today. You've been to many of these ceremonies. You've been here at CHEK for many of these ceremonies. What are you remembering today?
Well, I always obviously think about family who were involved in the First and Second World Wars. And many of my comrades who I remember and who have now left us. I mean, they've been in later campaigns since the war. But it's appalling how many have disappeared already. And I'm old enough to remember veterans from the First War and the Second World War, and they were incredible people. Yeah. And I often think of them, and especially today, of course.
Well, Richard, we appreciate you being here, and we thank you for making the time. You know, COVID-19 is not the only issue facing this year's ceremony at the legislature cenotaph. You may have noticed in those shots some construction work in the area. That is part of an ongoing project between the City of Victoria and the Legislative Assembly. When the work is done, we'll pull a shot up of what it should look like. Part of the reason for this project is to accommodate more people for events like Remembrance Day. So next year, hopefully the crowds will be back, and this is what they will be welcomed to, a new and improved cenotaph. Construction on this project is expected to wrap in mid-January. Not far from the BC Legislature, over the bridge and down Esquimalt Road, a small group is gathering at the Esquimalt Cenotaph, and that's where our Ben Nesbitt is this morning. Ben, over to you.
Good morning, Joe. Yeah, the weather's holding up quite nicely here. There's just under 50 people. It's a combination of members of CFB Esquimalt and Legion Branch 172. It looks different this year. Ceremonies across the country are going to look different. There's chairs spaced out all over the place to keep people safe. Masks are being recommended. But the usual ceremonial processes will continue on. The laying of the wreaths, there'll be just over 40 this year. So they're trying to keep things as normal as possible in these uncertain times. This ceremony here in Esquimalt is actually expected to be the biggest in Greater Victoria. And one thing that's being talked about, I've talked to members of the Legion, I've talked to veterans here, that at 11 o'clock, it's so important that even though many can't gather like we normally would, it's so important to stop, have that moment of reflection, and thank those who fought for our freedom. I actually just had the chance to speak to a veteran who's now 84 years old. He's been coming to these for decades, and what he told me was, even though we're in these uncertain times, he will never pass on an opportunity to come and pay his respects. We'll have more coverage here from Esquimalt just after 11 o'clock. Joe, I'll throw it back to you.
Ben, thank you. Ben Nesbitt reporting from Esquimalt. We also have Sky Ryan in Nanaimo. We will check in with her in a bit. Remembrance Day ceremonies have been playing out across the country this morning. Let's listen in now to the last post this morning from Ottawa. The tens of thousands of people absent this year at the National War Memorial in Ottawa. The ceremony featured some traditional elements, though. The playing of the last post, you're hearing it now. There was also the ceremonial laying of wreaths at the foot of the memorial. There was a special emphasis this year on the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, after many commemorations planned for earlier this year in Europe and elsewhere were cancelled because of COVID-19. I want to bring in another guest now, a man who served in the Second World War. He was just shy of 18 when he joined the Royal Air Force. He served in France, Africa, Italy, and Burma. And more recently, at the age of 101, he walked 101 laps outside his Oak Bay retirement home, raising money for children. We are very honored to have John Hillman joining us for this broadcast this morning. John, thank you for being here.
Good morning, Joe.
John, what are you...
Good morning, and I'm very pleased to be here. Had your invitation.
Well, we are so grateful that you accepted, and we're so glad you are here this morning. I want to ask you, John, what are you remembering today?
Well, I'm remembering lots of places that I went to. As you know, from my medal array indicates that I was in 4 active areas. I met a lot of people during that time, and I have tried very hard to remember them. Not very many, I'm afraid, and very, very few are now alive and kicking, like me.
John, what does Remembrance Day mean to you? I mean, it means different things to different people. We're looking at some shots now of your time. This was 1944 when you were in Burma, but I want to know what today means to you.
Well, I'm able to reminisce on people that I did know, incidents during the war, and not very many hazardous ones, but I met a lot of people, and I'm able to remember them and pay tribute to their efforts, and a lot of them made sacrifices, which I was lucky not to be a member of.
John, we thank you for your service, and we will check in with you throughout this broadcast, but thank you for being here, and again, thank you for your time that you served.
You're very welcome.
All right, John Hillman from his home at the Carlton House in Oak Bay. Richard will bring you back in now. This year's ceremony, which we'll get to shortly, it will look very different this year for people watching at home. Perhaps tee things up. What can people expect this year?
Well, it's going to be very much reduced. There's no question about that. It'll also be slightly muffled because I think everyone's going to be wearing masks. But there's going to be no marching troops of either the regular force or the militia or the cadets or the veterans. And of course there won't be the thousands of people we normally see. There won't be a band, for example, so I don't know how we're going to play God Save the Queen and O Canada.
No O Canada either.
Really?
Yeah.
We will thankfully still have a piper and a bugler. Both here and also in Nanaimo, so that's a good plus. But that's going to be about it.
You know, I can't imagine the person tasked with deciding what makes the cut and what doesn't.
Yeah.
How do you decide? I mean, are there elements that need to be there?
Well, you represent each of the armed forces around the cenotaph with one representative each. So there's a Canadian, Scottish, RCMP, Navy, Air Force around the cenotaph. So that's going to be it really for the representatives. And the regulations were very strict from the Department of National Defense to really keep the numbers down, wear masks, and social distance.
One of the things that people might notice when this ceremony begins, again, 10:50 is the time that we're expecting the Lieutenant Governor to arrive, is it's closing this year with the reciting of the Battle of Kohima, the memorial epitaph. And for you, that has some personal significance. Can you tell us about that?
Well, my family regiment, British regiment, was the Queen's Own Royal West Kent Regiment, and they were up on the border with Burma as the Japanese came through. And the Japanese began to invade India. And there was just a small garrison of 1,500 at Kohima, and 15,000 Japanese, so they're outnumbered 10 to 1. And they managed to hold them off for several weeks until they got relieved. And that was the turning point for the end of the Japanese war. It was the first time they'd been defeated. And as a result, Kohima was recently voted as the greatest battle in British history, which is a surprise because most of us here have not heard of it. But I knew many of the survivors from Kohima, and I suspect that John Hillman, as Air Force, might have been involved in supplying Kohima because they were supplied by air. And although he says there was nothing very dangerous, if you think about having your plane shot down over Japanese territory, that could be a bit life endangering, I suspect. So I think he's being very modest.
We will bring up another live shot of the cenotaph in Victoria right now. As you can see, it looks much different than it has in years past. The fencing around the cenotaph is keeping people away, but those people don't need to be kept away because many of them are at home. That's because of the construction work that's currently happening. As we wait for this ceremony to begin, let's check in now with Sky Ryan. She is at the ceremony today in Nanaimo. Here's Sky.
Joe, preparations are well underway here in Nanaimo, though lacking the crowds that we have seen in past years. Traditionally, we would be shoulder to shoulder with 15,000 people. Today, simply 50 people allowed within this blue rope to ensure everybody's safety during COVID-19. There will be a small parade, many people in uniform, but what organizers tell me is that many people have been coming through the morning to ensure that crowd size remains small and that those people that are of advanced age, we have one veteran here that's 102, remain safe. Obviously, these people already have served our country, and now this lack of people, a show of love from Nanaimo that always shows up to this ceremony.
You have people realize how we're doing it just to protect them from getting sick and whatnot. And they still have their heart in the war. But for the people that died, gave their lives and whatnot.
The parade will begin at 10:45 and then continue through the moment of silence. And there will be, again, 50 people only here, though thousands will be here in spirit.
All right, Sky, thank you very much. Sky Ryan reporting in Nanaimo. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we expect this ceremony from outside the legislature in the Inner Harbor. It will begin. Our coverage of this year's Remembrance Day will continue after this. Welcome back to our live coverage of Remembrance Day. We are live in the Inner Harbor at the cenotaph outside the legislature. We are awaiting the arrival of Lieutenant Governor Janet Austin. Some dignitaries have arrived. If you're just joining us, this will be a very scaled back ceremony this year. We have a rough outline of what we can expect, and it's nothing compared to years past. It could be very quick. We'll have to wait and see. They will be laying wreaths. We will have a bugler. We'll hear the last post. There'll be 2 minutes of silence. There you can see a very different look to this year's ceremony. The Lieutenant Governor expected to come down that long walkway there and join the other dignitaries as we get things going. I'll bring back Richard Talbot now. Richard, we were talking before the show started. We hear people say when they talk about this virus, and I think it's important to talk about COVID-19 right now because it's had such a significant impact on our ceremonies, but you hear things like the war on the virus, and you can't help but think back and make a comparison to other battles. And I'm hoping you can put this into perspective because people are struggling right now. It's a tough time for a lot of people, but when you think about the sacrifice that so many made, it's hard to make that comparison in a way.
Well, you know, it is very different. Mm-hmm. I was only a kid during the war, but I well remember the doodlebugs coming over and my father being away for most of the time. And rationing, you know, we were lucky to get rabbit and we were told it was chicken, but that was all right. And you obeyed regulations. I mean, there were very strict regulations about what you could do. You couldn't travel, certainly not at night. You had to have blackouts, very strict regulations, and yet it didn't affect you personally for your health. And so I find it very difficult to understand people who, from the health point of view, just simply don't follow the guidance of the scientists and doctors.
We should also say during this pandemic, our military members were some of the first people into those care homes, especially in Ontario and Quebec, dropping off critical health supplies. I believe about 200 of our military servicemen and women actually contracted the virus. So once again, they are on the front lines absolutely. Of a new battle.
Yeah.
Another element that I want to get in today is the families of the servicemen and women. This is very much a day for them too. Right. You know, they are the ones that stay home. They are the ones that hold down the home front. And in many ways, we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. These are the people that are seeing this firsthand and dealing with it when it comes back. The significance of family on a day like today.
Well, I certainly, I mean, I can think back to my own mother when my father was missing in France, for example, for several weeks. And the worry, obviously, about what the heck has happened. Is he coming back? Has he been killed? So you had that worry for the families. But today, you know, troops are away for lengthy periods of time. They do go into danger, both in the Navy and the Air Force and the Army. And we have had casualties, even quite recently. So even some just within the last month. So it's always a worry and it's always a concern. And it's really tough on the wives particularly and the children. And that's something which we really shouldn't forget.
You are looking at a live shot. You can see the Lieutenant Governor, Janet Austin, has arrived. We are expecting this ceremony to begin any moment now. Also on hand today is Victoria's Silver Cross mother, Sheila Fines. I believe her husband, Sean, is there. Many people will know this family's heartbreaking story. Their son, Corporal Stuart Langridge, a Canadian soldier. He took his own life in 2008 after returning from Afghanistan with PTSD. She's been Victoria's Silver Cross mother for quite some time. The MC today is Len Reed. He's at the podium, and we expect things to get going here shortly. Let's listen in for a moment and watch as the Lieutenant Governor arrives.
Ladies and gentlemen, our ceremony is about to commence. We would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen people, now known as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. Let us remember those who have died in the service of their country, those whom we knew, and those whose memory we treasure, and all who have lived and died in the service of humankind. We will now sing, O Canada.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. And now, prayers and the benediction by Legion Padre Reverend Canon Andrew Gates.
Would you pray with me? O God, our help in ages past, yet who remembers today? 100 years ago, another pandemic claimed the lives of millions. And from the ashes of war, pandemic, and financial ruin, came an ugly generation of despotic, ruthless, barbaric, power-hungry leaders who took the world to yet another devastation. O God, our help in ages past, don't let us forget today. It's better to fight for peace through the ballot box than with a gun. Better to remember the beauty of the earth than the desolation of a bomb. Better to give thanks for a life well lived than one sacrificed on the altar of greed. O God, our help in ages past, this is not an easy stand to take, not an easy place to stand. And these are not easy times. God, enable and embolden us, for we are better than cannon fodder, for we are the inheritors of the dreams of those who gave their all, that we might know peace. O God, our help in ages past, be our help today. And so may the angels of heaven protect you, encircle you with the fragrance of peace. May my Lord and loving Father protect you this day, encircle you with the affection and love. And may the Spirit of truth protect you this day, encircle you and fill you with joy. And may the blessing of our eternal God and Father be with you now and unto the ages to come. Amen.
Laying of the wreaths with escorts will now commence. Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, Her Honor, the Honorable Janet Austin, escorted by her aide-de-camp, Inspector Robert Warren of the Saanich Police Department.
You're watching live
Canadian
coverage
Maritime Forces,
of our Remembrance Day ceremony in the Inner Harbour here in Victoria. I'll bring in Richard Talbot as we watch the laying of the wreaths. Richard, your thoughts as we watch this ceremony, a new look ceremony, but they have kept much of what we've seen in past years.
Yes, I think it's the traditional ceremony, and it's just that the participation of armed forces and civilians alike is not available today. And that's sad, but at least we can watch it on TV. And hopefully people are at home following the service and following the 2-minute silence.
Here is Victoria's Silver Cross mother, Sheila Fines, along with her husband, Sean, and their son, Michael. The significance.
Royal Canadian Legion, BC Yukon Command.
The significance of the Silver Cross Mother, Richard, that is a representation of those families here on the home front, is it not?
Yes, exactly. Normally one Silver Cross Mother is appointed each year, who is the mother of a lost serviceman normally during that year.
And of course we remember Sheila's son, Corporal Stuart Langridge, along with all the other servicemen and women who did not make it back,
Right.
or in the case of Corporal Langridge, tragically took their own life after serving in Afghanistan. Let's listen in as we watch more of the laying of the wreaths.
When you go home, tell them of us, and say for your tomorrow, we gave today. And now the benediction.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May you know the peace that passes all understanding. And this we pray in God's name. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, the Queen. God bless our gracious Queen. Long live our noble Queen. God save the Queen. Send her victorious, happy and glorious, long to reign over us. God save the Queen.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this ceremony. Thank you for coming.
And that is this year's Remembrance Day ceremony from Victoria. We will also be bringing you in the next few minutes coverage from Esquimalt and Nanaimo as you see the dignitaries leaving there. Richard, I'll bring you back in here now. You know, one of the things that was missing for me this year, I mean, that was a beautiful ceremony, and I'm so glad that it happened. But it's those shots of the crowds, you know, during the 2 minutes of silence, and you see people of all ages.
Yes.
You know, the young and the old, the grandfathers with their grandchildren. And I can't help but think about those veterans who weren't able to make it down this year. You know, many of them bringing their grandchildren and their family down to take part in this. And my thoughts are with them this year, because I imagine this must be a difficult year. On top of everything else that's happened this year, we heard the chaplain say these are not easy times, that this must be difficult and weighing on them.
No, I think the grandchildren are certainly a problem, and that's a problem for me too. Minus in England and also here, but you very rarely see them. Well, once from England, you don't see at all. Hopefully, they will have been wearing the little Glengarries and gone to a local Remembrance Day ceremony. But it's sad not to have them with us at this time, and we not just think about friends and immediate family, but even family going back to First World War and beyond. And there is hardly a family here in Canada or in the UK that doesn't have some military connection.
Do you think the message is getting through to the younger generation? I mean, as the years pass and we get farther and farther away from the Second World War and the First World War,
right?
You know, it is so important that we have ceremonies like this so that we never forget, and we always stop and pause and say thank you and remember. Do you think that that message is getting through to the youth that this is something that has to be done?
Well, I think here on Vancouver Island that isn't a problem. You look at the crowds in recent years have been growing, and as you say, younger and younger people have also been attending and feel they should go. I think Afghanistan and the Balkans, for example, have helped that because it's more relevant to the younger people, and many of their friends would have served. So that'll hopefully keep it going for a while yet. It's unfortunate to get a gap like this because the momentum gets lost a little bit. But hopefully we'll be back with a vengeance next year and we'll have the same numbers back.
I thought the chaplain's prayer was particularly poignant. That was the one moment where he addressed that, look, there is a lot going on right now in this world.
Right.
He mentioned ballot boxes, I think a little bit of a signal to our friends south of the border and what's happening there right now. But I thought that was important to mention that, look, this is an odd time for everyone.
Yes.
Yet it's one of many difficult, odd times that we have faced. And I think that is one of the storylines that we need to talk about this year.
Well, I think, you know, this generation has been very fortunate. There's not been a major war. There's been some minor wars. I mean, Afghanistan was pretty major from the armed forces point of view, but it didn't involve conscription and people being sent away for 4 or 5 years, which is what happened in the previous 2 wars. And even Korea wasn't that lengthy, although it was a pretty ghastly battle. So we've become complacent to a certain extent, and maybe this is a wake-up call. Maybe this is a wake-up call that bad things do happen, and you can't control them, and you just have to respond as best you can.
And we can look to the past and take away lessons and memories and learn from that.
Absolutely, yeah.
We have some sights and sounds from the ceremony that was happening in Esquimalt that we'd like to show you now. So let's listen in and watch what just played out today from the Esquimalt cenotaph.
Let us pause for a few moments to think reverently of those of our comrades who by sea, on land, and in the air laid down their lives for their sovereign and country. Their sacrifice will ever inspire us to labor on to the end, that those who survive and need our aid may be assured of assistance, and that the country in which we live and for which they died may ever be worthy of the sacrifice they made.
That was some of the ceremony this morning from Esquimalt. We will show you a similar ceremony happening in the harbor city in Nanaimo. But as we wait for that, how we remember is different for everyone. And for one Saanich woman, her thoughts are with the more than 1 million children who died in the Holocaust. She visited Auschwitz and made it her mission to honor those children who died at the hands of the Nazis. This is her story. Christy Morrison's music has never been the same, not since the day the island composer traveled to Auschwitz and toured the site where more than 6 million Jews were murdered during the Second World War. It was inside a barracks that used to house the young Jewish children that Christy's life changed forever.
It was so on my heart that I knew that I had to do something.
The Saanich woman made it her mission to find a child survivor who would become the inspiration behind her second goal: to compose a piece of music to honor the young souls killed in the concentration camps. Years later, fate kicks in during a vacation in Scottsdale, Arizona, and a random stop at a used bookstore.
On the top shelf, I found a book entitled A Boy's Story, A Man's Memory by Oscar Knobloch.
The book was one man's story of how he survived the Holocaust, and guess where the author lived?
Wonderful new friend, Oscar.
Scottsdale, Arizona. Christy emailed Oscar, and hours later they met up.
My life was spared by 2 Nazis.
Oscar told her his story of how he was 14 when the Second World War broke out, how his family was held for years in concentration camps, his father murdered by the Nazis, and how he spent years living in this Gestapo subcamp only to have his life saved by the most unlikeliest of people.
The very people who were supposed to have killed me actually gave me my life.
It was a member of the Gestapo who took a liking to Oscar and refused to send him to his death.
They call me all kinds of very nasty names.
At 95 years old, he spends his days speaking to students, sharing his story and the lesson he learned from one rogue Gestapo officer.
You need to accept people for what they are. You have to work with them. It doesn't matter what they look like, where they come from, what religion they are, what skin color they are.
And he says you'll find that message in this music that you're listening to now. This is a taste of Christy's finished composition called The Lost Nursery Rhymes of Innocent Children, a piece Oscar never imagined he'd live to hear.
She is God sent. That's in my opinion. In other words, she was supposed to be in my life, and I was supposed to be in her life.
2 souls brought together to make sure a world never forgets.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And we thank Oscar for sharing his story with us and Christy. All right, we want to bring back our other special guest today, John Hillman, a 101-year-old veteran. Many of you will know him from his 101 laps that he walked outside Carlton House in Oak Bay. John, I'm told that you were able to watch the ceremony from your library at Carlton House. Was there something that stood out for you as you were watching the Remembrance Day ceremony in Victoria?
Yes, I remembered 2 things significantly. One is very selfish because it concerns my wife. My wife and I were separated in May of this year, and she was taken into a long-term care, but the significance of that is that the 27th of December this year we will have been married 79 years, and I am hoping, and I'm sure she is hoping also, that we will last that time. So that is the one tribute that I am selfish about. But there is one I would also like to include, and that is I have recently been joined at my table for dinner, for lunch and dinner, to a Holocaust survivor. And he and I have formed a very great friendship, and together we have a message that we would like to send to the present generations and the forthcoming generations. Our message is, don't ever let it happen again. And that is the end of my message. Thank you.
Well, John, that's a very powerful message, and you do not have to feel selfish at all for remembering your wife on a day like today. You know, I want to ask you, 75 years, you met your wife, correct me if I'm wrong, during the First World War, and I want to ask, tell us, if you can, do you remember that day?
Oh, yes. I remember that day very well. Yes, we had a double wedding. My wife and her sister all stood together, and myself and my brother-in-law, who was from the Canadian Air Force. That is obviously why we have connections with Canada now. But he and I were made to live the night before with one of Irene's, that's my wife, uncles. And he was given very strict instructions to make sure that we arrived at the altar sober. Unfortunately, we weren't. However, that is a memory that will live with me till the end of my days. So that one, I'll keep to myself now.
Oh, John, thank you for sharing that. And I have to correct myself. I said the First World War. I meant the Second World War. But John, on behalf of everyone watching and all of us at CHEK, thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for your service. And you have made your wife proud, your family proud, and all of Vancouver Island proud. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you for the invitation.
All right.
Thank you.
John Hellman live from Carlton House in Oak Bay. I'll bring back Richard Talbot. I could listen to stories from John all day long. Your thoughts when you hear that?
Well, it's interesting, you know, we talked about Kohima earlier, and I noticed he was wearing his Burma Star badge and also on his hat. And I've never heard him talk about Burma, but it must have been a pretty terrible time flying over Japanese territory. And if you were shot down, you had to escape through the jungle. So I'd like to hear some of his stories on that at one time.
Yeah, I know the star is on his chest. I know that one of them is for his time serving in France and in Italy and in Africa and Burma. And then there were two more, and I don't know what they are. You probably have a better understanding.
I think it's the War Medal and the Victory Medal, probably.
Yesterday, we had a chance to sit down with Second World War veteran Peter Chance. Peter is a man who served in the Royal Canadian Navy as a navigator. He provided escorts for Atlantic convoys. He was also part of D-Day and the Korean War. We wanted to re-air this for you. This is Peter reflecting on his naval career and what this day means to him.
The convoys were in lines about 1,000 yards apart and about 6 ships deep. And the name of the game, of course, was to get those desperately needed convoys with all their contents to starving Britain.
Now, I understand you were also a part of D-Day as well.
Oh, yes, yeah. So we sailed out of Portsmouth in southern England, below the northwest tip of France, to a place called Odéon Bay. The idea was to confuse the enemy that we were returning German vessels. And as they came into our range, we opened up flashless ammunition and blew them out of the water.
What does Remembrance Day mean to you?
Well, a great deal. It's remembering the guys that didn't make it. There was an enormous sacrifice, you know. I feel, because I'm going to be 100, you know, very shortly, this month, that there were poignant, shall we say, moments when we remembered the guys who didn't make it. And we're grateful for our comrades who did and came home.
And thank you to Peter for sharing his story, and thank you to him for his service. Before we wrap things up, we want to take you back up to Nanaimo for some of the sights and the sounds of the ceremony today in the Harbor City. Richard, last word today goes to you. Is there a message that you want to get out to the people watching today, something you want to leave with them as they many of them spend this day with their family and other veterans?
Well, I think we need to remember this is the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. So our veterans are getting pretty depleted. I think there's only 3,000 plus left in Canada. So as they start to fade away, it's up to us, the next generation, and the ones after that, to remember what the sacrifices they made. And hopefully that'll continue for many years.
Well, Richard, thank you for spending part of your morning with us for another year on this Remembrance Day. It's not the same without you, so we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. That concludes our Remembrance Day coverage, honoring the memory of those who sacrificed so much for us, for retired Honorary Colonel Richard Talbot, for John Hillman, and our hardworking crews, both at our island cenotaphs and here in studio. Thank you so much for sharing this morning for us, or with us, I should say. Most of all, we want to thank our veterans, those who serve now, their families, those who served before. We thank you. Julian Colsuit will have more on Remembrance Day ceremonies tonight at 5 o'clock. As we sign off, though, we will turn things over to a group of grade 4 and 5 students from George J. Elementary in Victoria as they recite In Flanders Fields.
In Flanders Fields by John McCrae. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below.
We are the dead short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields.
Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high, if ye break faith with us who die.
We shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.